The silence in the sanctum of concordance was a physical entity, a pressure that warped the light filtering through the cavernous chamber's crystalline superstructure. It was an ancient silence, cultivated over millennia, the hallmark of the Glycan hegemony's reign, a quiet enforced by absolute order. But today, it was a fractured, suffocating thing. Kalen of the third echelon felt it pressing on his mind, a weight heavier than the grav plates that held his frail form to the polished obsidian floor. He stood among the silent monoliths of his peers, the assembled delegates of 100 star systems, all their multifaceted eyes fixed upon the shimmering data column at the chamber's heart. The column displayed a single, stark image, a vessel, impossibly angular and dark against the void, a construct of some unknown and profoundly unsettling design. It was a human ship. For cycles, the humans had been a whisper on the hyperspatial comms, a distant anomaly confined to their solitary arm of the galaxy. They were new, brash, and by all Glycan metrics, chaotically primitive. Their expansion had been clumsy, their diplomatic overtures filled with a strange, unreadable emotional resonance that the hegemony's logic engines had flagged as a sign of intellectual immaturity. They were deemed a curiosity, a species to be observed and contained, but never a threat. Not until now. This vessel, designated Warship Pattern Alpha by the hegemony's preliminary scans, had appeared at the edge of Glycan-patrolled space, at the very precipice of the terminus line, a demarcation that no species had dared to cross without invitation for 10,000 years. It did not transmit greetings. It did not power its weapons. It simply waited. "It is an act of aggression," Vorex, the Grand Marshal of the Concordant Fleet, finally hissed, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. His armored carapace, a deep iridescent crimson, seemed to bristle with latent kinetic energy. To cross the terminus is to declare intent. To remain silent is to issue a challenge. The patterns are clear. He gestured with a bladed forelimb toward the data column. Its energy signature is colossal, far exceeding that of a standard dreadnought. The material composition of its hull is of a density we have not previously encountered. This is a weapon of intimidation. Kalen kept his own thoughts veiled, a discipline honed over centuries of diplomatic service. Vorex saw only patterns of aggression because that was the lens through which he viewed the cosmos. He saw a threat, and the only logical response to a threat was its immediate and overwhelming nullification. But Kalen saw something else in the silent ship. He saw a question. The vessel's design was not efficient. It was filled with brutalist, non-functional angles and structures that seemed to serve no purpose in combat or stealth. It was an aesthetic of pure, unyielding presence, a statement carved into the fabric of spacetime. It was not a ship built for a logical purpose that the Glycan could comprehend. The progenitor, the ancient, unmoving being who presided over the hegemony from its throne of living crystal, stirred. Its voice was not spoken but felt, a low thrum that vibrated through the very floor of the sanctum, a resonance that carried the weight of ages. The Grand Marshal's assessment is noted. However, the vessel has made no hostile maneuvers. It has not raised its shields to a combat-ready state. Its weapon emplacements remain cold. Logic dictates that we must gather more information before committing to a course of action that cannot be undone. Vorex bowed his head, a gesture of respect that barely concealed his simmering impatience. Progenitor, with deference, its very existence here is a hostile maneuver. These humans are unpredictable. Their societal data streams are a chaotic torrent of contradictory philosophies, of self-glorification and self-flagellation in equal measure. They wage war on one another with a ferocity we have not seen since the primordial conflicts, yet they compose symphonies of staggering beauty about peace. They are a paradox. A species defined by its own internal schisms cannot be trusted to abide by the logical order of the concordance. It was true. The few archived transmissions the Glycan had intercepted from the human sphere were a source of endless consternation for their analysts. Human history was a litany of violence, but their art and philosophy spoke of a profound yearning for transcendence. They were a species at war with itself, and for the Glycan, whose entire civilization was built upon the principle of the Great Severance, the surgical and cultural excision of all destabilizing emotions and internal conflicts. Such a state of being was terrifying. It was the definition of chaos. And yet, Kalen spoke, his own voice quiet but clear, cutting through the heavy atmosphere. They have mastered technologies that rival our own in a fraction of the T. Their grasp of theoretical physics is unconventional but effective. To dismiss them as merely chaotic is to underestimate them. It is an error in logic. He turned his gaze to the data column, to the dark, silent ship. The progenitor is correct. We require more information. The initial scans were inconclusive, designed only to assess immediate threat. I propose a deep structure systemic scan, a full energy-to-matter resonance probe. We will peel back its layers one by one. We will know its every secret, its every function, its every weakness. We will understand what it is before we decide how to respond to it. Vorex let out a low growl of protest. A deep scan is intrusive. It is a violation. If they are as volatile as we suspect, it could provoke the very conflict we seek to avoid. Or, the progenitor resonated, its voice final, it will provide the clarity we lack. The silence of that vessel is a void. We must fill it with data. Kalen, you will oversee the scan. You will interpret its findings. The concordance will wait for your report. The silence will hold. The progenitor's command was absolute. The data column shimmered, and the debate was over. Kalen felt the collective gaze of the chamber settle upon him, a burden of expectation that was as cold and as heavy as the void itself. He was to be the one to look into the heart of the human paradox, to decipher the meaning of their silent challenge. As the assembly dispersed, a great and terrible stillness descended once more, but it was no longer the calm of order. It was the silence of a breath held before a storm. The deep scan was an act of profound technological violation. A stream of coherent tachyons, woven into an impossibly complex matrix, would wash over the human vessel, penetrating its hull, mapping its corridors, analyzing the quantum state of its every atom. It was the hegemony's ultimate tool of intelligence, a way to know an enemy more intimately than they knew themselves. Kalen stood on the observation deck of the primary sensor relay station, a moon-sized installation hidden within the swirling nebulae of the Glycan borderlands. Before him, a holographic representation of the human ship hung in the darkness, rendered in ghostly blue light. The real vessel was light minutes away, still waiting with that unnerving patience. "Initiate the primary wave," Kalen commanded, his voice betraying none of the apprehension he felt. The technicians around him, their movements precise and economical, complied. A ripple of energy, invisible to any eye, surged from the relay station and hurtled towards its target. Kalen watched the hologram, waiting for the first streams of data to return. He expected to see power conduits, shield generators, weapon capacitors, ammunition storage, and crew quarters. He expected to see the logical, brutal architecture of a warship. The first wave of data arrived. The outer hull. The readings were anomalous. The density was beyond any known stable alloy, but it was not uniform. It was interlaced with crystalline microstructures that seemed to be arranged in patterns like a script. The logic engines began their analysis, but they returned only errors. The patterns did not correspond to any known engineering principle. They were too complex, too intricate, too deliberate. It was as if the hull itself was a message, a text written in the language of atoms. "Proceed to internal structural scan," Kalen ordered, a knot of unease tightening within him. The second wave went out. This time the data would reveal the ship's skeleton, its purpose. The seconds stretched into minutes. The technicians murmured to one another, their calm efficiency beginning to fray. The data was not resolving into a coherent schematic. It was a jumble of contradictions. "Report," Kalen demanded. The lead technician, a being of living silicon named Xyler, turned from its console, its crystalline face flickering with confusion. "Sir, the readings make no sense. We are detecting immense power conduits, enough to sustain a fleet, all converging on the ship's core. The energy signature is stable, but of a magnitude that should be physically impossible to contain within a vessel of this size. Yet, there are no primary weapon systems." Kalen's thoughts reeled. "Impossible. The exterior is lined with weapon emplacements. We counted them." "Yes, sir," Xyler confirmed, tapping a command into its console. A new layer of data overlaid the hologram. "The emplacements are there, the barrels, the focusing arrays, the power couplings. They are all present, but they are not connected to the primary power core. They are dormant, cold. There is no ammunition, no energy charge, no firing mechanism. They are shells, facsimiles of weapons." A chill and emotion Kalen had not felt since his earliest maturation cycle crept through him. A warship with no weapons, a vessel with the power of a sun but no way to project it. It was a logical absurdity. It was a lie. Scan the interior spaces, crew complement, life support, command center. The data flooded in and the absurdity deepened into a chilling, profound mystery. The ship was almost entirely empty. There were corridors, vast open chambers, and structural supports, but there were no crew quarters, no barracks, no mess halls, no recreation facilities. There was no sign of a large contingent of soldiers or sailors. Life support systems were active, but only at a minimal level sufficient for a mere handful of beings, not the thousands required to operate a vessel of this class. The bridge, the supposed command center at the vessel's heart, was not a bridge. It was a small, isolated chamber, shielded with layers of exotic matter that resisted the scan. And at the ship's absolute core, where the immense power source resided, there was nothing. The scan could not penetrate it. It was a hole in reality, a sphere of perfect blackness from which no information escaped, yet from which all the ship's impossible energy emanated. But it was the final scan, the one that mapped the intricate patterns on the inner surfaces of the hull, that shattered the last vestiges of Kalen's composure. The script-like microstructures on the outer hull were repeated on every internal surface, every bulkhead, every support beam. The logic engines, working at their maximum capacity, finally broke the code. It was not an engineering schematic. It was not a tactical overlay. It was a list. A list of names. Billions of them. Kalen stared at the flowing, incomprehensible script now translated into Glycan characters scrolling across the main screen. Names, an endless, cascading river of designations, each one unique. He felt a wave of vertigo, a sense of falling into an abyss of understanding he could not grasp. A warship with no weapons, no crew, a hollow shell powered by a singularity, its every surface inscribed with an encyclopedia of the dead. What was this thing? What manner of species would build such a monument and send it to the edge of another's territory as their first emissary? He ordered the technicians to withdraw the scan. He had seen enough. The data was compiled, compressed into a single, terrifying report. He knew that when he presented this to the sanctum, the silence that followed would not be one of anticipation. It would be one of pure, unadulterated shock. The humans were not chaotic primitives. They were not brash conquerors. They were something else entirely, something ancient and sorrowful and terrifyingly powerful. The ship was not a weapon. It was a statement. And Kalen was beginning to fear. He understood the language in which it was written. It was the language of ghosts. The return to the sanctum of concordance was a journey through a landscape of dread. The data packet containing the scan results felt like a cold stone in Kalen's mind, a weight of incomprehensible truth. When he stood once more before the assembled monoliths of the hegemony, the pressure of the silence was different. It was laced with Vorex's smug expectation of a confirmed threat and the progenitor's patient, all-knowing stillness. Kalen knew he was about to shatter both. He activated the data column. Instead of tactical schematics and power-level charts, he projected the raw, translated findings. He began with the hull. "The vessel's exterior is not armor in the conventional sense," he stated, his voice steady despite the tremor in his soul. "It is a tapestry of information, a text." He let the translation of the endlessly scrolling names fill the column. A low, confused murmur rippled through the delegates. "Names," Vorex's voice boomed, dripping with contempt. "What is the meaning of this, Kalen? Is this some human psychological tactic, a list of their conquerors, their battle honors?" "No, Grand Marshal," Kalen replied, turning to face the hulking warrior. "They are not lists of conquerors, they are memorials, they are the dead." He let the weight of that word settle in the vast chamber. He then displayed the internal scans, the hollow corridors, the empty chambers. He showed them the weapon emplacements, structurally perfect but internally inert. "The ship is a facade. It is designed to look like a warship, to project an image of immense martial power. It has the energy signature of a fleet, but it has no functional weapons." He paused, letting the logical contradictions cascade through the minds of the assembly. "It has minimal life support. We estimate a crew of no more than 10 individuals. It is not a dreadnought. It is not a carrier. It is not a battleship. It is a tomb. A floating mausoleum powered by a captured singularity, its hull forged from the names of its fallen. We do not know why it is here. We do not know what it represents. But it is not a tool of war as we understand it." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a stillness born not of order, but of profound, systemic shock. The Glycan mind, a thing of patterns and predictable logic, could not process this information. A culture that built a monument to its dead and then sent it across the stars as a first contact was beyond their comprehension. It was Vorex who broke the silence, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "A trick," he spat. "A deception of unimaginable arrogance. They mock us. They present us with a puzzle box, a paradox, to confuse and immobilize us while their true fleets prepare to strike. It is the only logical conclusion. They are chaotic, yes, but not insane. This is a stratagem, a Trojan horse constructed of lies and dead names." Many in the chamber nodded, the familiarity of Vorex's aggression a comforting anchor in a sea of confusion. But the progenitor remained still, its resonant voice cutting through the rising tide of fear. You assume their logic mirrors our own, Grand Marshal. It is a fundamental error. Kalen, your interpretation. All eyes turned back to Kalen. He felt the crushing weight of his duty. He had to make them understand. I do not believe it is a trick. The resources required to build such a vessel are monumental. To expend them on a mere deception is inefficient. Illogical. I believe it is a message. The humans are telling us who they are. Our own history teaches us of the great severance. We encountered a trauma in our distant past, a conflict so devastating that we chose to excise the memory of it from our collective consciousness. We cut away our pain, our grief, our rage. We became a species of pure, cold logic because we feared the chaos of emotion. We buried our dead and forgot their names. He gestured to the scrolling list on the data column. The humans have done the opposite. They have taken their trauma, their grief, their history of self-destruction, and they have forged it into their greatest vessel. They do not hide their scars, they display them for the galaxy to see. This ship is not a threat of what they will do to us. It is a warning of what they have done to themselves. It is a promise, written in the language of their own immense suffering, that they will never do it again. His words hung in the air, a radical, terrifying philosophy that struck at the very foundation of Glycan civilization. To embrace pain, to memorialize failure, it was anathema. It was the path to chaos, the very thing they had engineered their society to avoid for 100,000 years. As the debate was about to erupt into a firestorm of fear and doubt, a new signal registered on the Sanctum's primary comms panel. It was a transmission from the human ship. It was not a coded military signal or a broad spectrum hail. It was a single, tightly focused beam aimed directly at the Sanctum. It contained no threats, no demands, only a simple, elegant packet of information, a request to open a dialogue and a set of coordinates for a face-to-face meeting in neutral space. It was signed with a single title, Ambassador. The humans had known they were being scanned. They had waited for the Glycan to see their truth, and only then, after the silence had been broken by the weight of their own history, did they choose to speak. The decision was no longer about how to react to a silent threat. It was about how to answer a voice that had finally, deliberately, chosen to be heard. The meeting took place in the void, a silent ballet of diplomacy and tension. The human ship, now identified by its own transmission as the TCS Vigilance, floated against the backdrop of a swirling, violet nebula. It was met not by a Glycan warship, but by Kalen's diplomatic vessel, a sleek, unarmed courier designed for speed and communication, a deliberate gesture of non-aggression that had been hotly debated in the Sanctum. Kalen, accompanied by a small retinue of linguistic and cultural analysts, stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the airlock of the Vigilance cycle open. A single figure was emerging, encased in a form-fitting environmental suit. The human ambassador was brought aboard, and when her helmet was removed in the sterile white light of the conference chamber, Kalen felt another wave of disorientation. She was small, frail by Glycan standards. Her features were soft, her eyes a deep, unreadable brown. There was no sign of the chaotic aggression he had been conditioned to expect. She moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, her posture one of serene confidence, not arrogance. She introduced herself as Ambassador Eva Rostova. On behalf of the Terran conglomerate, I thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Delegate Kalen, she said, her voice smooth, the Glycan language flawless, yet tinged with that same strange emotional resonance that had so baffled their logic engines. It was not chaos, Kalen realized now. It was depth. Ambassador, Kalen replied, his own voice formal and precise. Your vessel's arrival has caused considerable disruption within the hegemony. We must ask for an explanation of your purpose here at our border. In a ship of such unique design. Rostova's gaze was direct, unwavering. The Vigilance is not a warship, Delegate. It is a statement of principle. We knew you would scan us. We intended for you to do so. We wanted you to see who we are before we spoke. And what is it that you believe we saw? Kalen pressed, his mind racing. You saw our memory, she answered simply. You saw the price of our wisdom. Our species nearly consumed itself. We learned the lessons of fire by burning, and we have the scars to prove it. The names on the hull of the Vigilance belong to every human who has ever died in a war waged by other humans. It is our testament, our promise to ourselves and to the universe, that we have finally outgrown our own violent adolescence. The chamber was silent. Kalen's analysts exchanged glances, their minds struggling to process the sheer scale of such a concept. To record every single casualty of every conflict, it was a task of incomprehensible scope, a burden of grief that would crush any logical mind. "You call this wisdom?" Kalen asked, genuinely curious. "To dwell on failure, to memorialize pain, the Glycan philosophy is to move beyond such things. The great severance freed us from the tyranny of irrational emotion. We achieved peace through forgetting." A faint, sad smile touched Rostova's lips. "We do not see it as dwelling, we see it as remembering. Forgetting does not heal a wound, delegate. It only allows it to fester in the dark. We believe that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding. And understanding can only be born from the honest acknowledgement of past mistakes. The Vigilance and its sister ships stand guard on all our borders, not as weapons, but as reminders. They remind us of the cost of hatred. They remind our potential enemies that we understand war more intimately than they can possibly imagine, and that we will do anything to avoid it. But they also stand as a promise that if we are forced to fight, we will do so with the full weight of that memory behind us, and we will not falter." She gestured to the viewport toward the dark, immense shape of her ship. "The power core you detected is not for a weapon, it is for a shield capable of withstanding the energy of a supernova. The Vigilance cannot attack, it can only endure. It is the ultimate expression of our resolve. We will not strike first, but we will not be moved." Kalen felt a profound shift in his perception, a crumbling of the very foundations of his worldview. The Glycan's peace was a fragile thing, an enforced stillness built on a foundation of willful ignorance. They had not solved their problems, they had merely buried them. The humans, these chaotic, emotional, paradoxical beings, had faced their demons head-on. They had wrestled them into submission, not by killing them, but by understanding them. Their peace was not a fragile shell. It was a tempered sword, forged in the fires of unimaginable self-inflicted horror. "You wish to open a dialogue," Kalen said, his voice softer now. "What is it you wish to discuss?" Rostova's expression grew serious, the light in her eyes hardening into something ancient and resolute. "We have come to your border because our long-range sensors have detected something in the void beyond your territory. An echo, a pattern we have not encountered in millennia, but one which our ancestors recorded in their deepest, most terrified legends. A silence that is not empty but hungry." She paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in. "The Vigilance is not just a memorial, delegate, it is a watchtower, and it has seen a shadow moving in the dark, out on the edge of the galaxy. We came here not to challenge the Glycan hegemony, but to warn it. Something is coming, and we do not believe you are prepared for it. Your severance has made you strong, but it has also made you blind. You have forgotten how to fear the dark, and fear, when properly understood, is a vital tool for survival." The revelation struck Kalen with the force of a physical blow. The human ship was not an emissary, it was not a monument, it was a sentinel, a guardian standing a lonely vigil against a forgotten nightmare, and they had come to the Glycan not as conquerors but as potential allies, offering a warning born from their own deep, traumatic past. The true purpose of the human presence was not a mystery to be solved, but a terror to be faced. The broken silence was not just the end of a political standoff. It was the first whisper of a scream that threatened to engulf the entire galaxy. When Kalen returned to the sanctum, the atmosphere was no longer one of mere tension. It was a crucible of existential dread. He stood before the hegemony again, but this time he did not present data. He presented a truth, a narrative relayed from Ambassador Rostova, a story that was both a history of humanity and a prophecy for the galaxy. He spoke of their self-destructive war, of their near extinction, and of the profound cultural shift that had led to the creation of the Vigil-class ships. He explained their philosophy of remembrance, of peace through the unflinching embrace of past trauma. "They are not the chaotic primitives we believed them to be," Kalen concluded, his voice resonating with a newfound conviction that startled even himself. "They are survivors. They have walked through the fire of their own making and emerged tempered. Their society is not built on the denial of their nature, but on the mastery of it. What we call chaos, they call experience. What we call a weakness, their emotional depth, is the very source of their incredible resilience." Vorex stepped forward, his crimson carapace seeming to darken in the ambient light. "A story, Kalen, a well-crafted fable designed to lull us into complacency. They speak of a shadow in the dark, a convenient, unverifiable threat, to forge an alliance to gain access to our territory and our technology. They are using our own logic against us, presenting a greater external threat to mask their own hostile intent. The pattern is classic. It is the oldest deception in the cosmos." "Is it?" The progenitor's voice resonated, cutting through Vorex's tirade. For the first time, a note of something other than serene omniscience could be felt in its tone. It was uncertainty. Our own archives, the ones predating the Great Severance, are sealed. We deem them a corrupting influence, a source of the very chaos we sought to eliminate. They speak of a time of cosmic night, of a silent enemy that did not conquer but erased. We dismissed these as primitive myths, the emotional hysteria of our ancestors. The progenitor turned its unseen focus to Kalen. These humans, they claim this enemy is real. They are certain of it, Kalen affirmed. The vigilance is not the only one. They have a fleet of them standing sentinel on every edge of their territory, listening. They have been listening for 1,000 years, waiting for an echo of the enemy that nearly destroyed their first interstellar colonies. They have recently detected that echo. It emanates from the intergalactic void beyond the borders of our hegemony. They call it the null pattern, a signal that carries no information but actively cancels it. A wave of cosmic entropy, a slow-moving tide that erases matter and energy from existence. A wave of horror, a deeply suppressed and unfamiliar emotion, rippled through the assembled glycan. The concept was a violation of physics, of logic, of life itself. Ambassador Rostova has extended an invitation, Kalen continued, pressing his advantage. She asks for you, progenitor, and a delegation from this council to come aboard the Vigilance, not to negotiate but to bear witness, to see the data for yourselves, to look upon the face of this threat with their own eyes. Vorex slammed his bladed forearm against the obsidian floor, the sharp crack echoing through the cavernous hall. This is madness. The progenitor will not set foot upon a vessel of a questionable, primitive species. It is a trap. It is a test, the progenitor's voice thrummed, silencing all dissent. A test of our own philosophy. For millennia, we have maintained order through the suppression of inconvenient truths. We have built a peace upon a foundation of ignorance. These humans, in their short, violent history, have offered us a different path. Strength through knowledge, no matter how terrible that knowledge may be. They have not asked us to trust their story. They have asked us to verify their data. That is a proposition rooted in logic. I will accept. The decision was final. Vorex recoiled as if struck, his certainty shattered by the progenitor's unassailable logic. The hegemony, a civilization that had not altered its core philosophy in 100,000 years, was about to take a step into the unknown, guided by a species they had dismissed as little more than barbarians. The silence of the sanctum was finally, truly broken, replaced by the terrifying, exhilarating hum of a new and uncertain future. The bridge of the TCS Vigilance was unlike any command center Kalen could have conceived. It was not a place of war, but of contemplation. The central chamber was vast and circular, its walls not solid but a seamless 360-degree view screen showing the starfield outside in perfect, breathtaking clarity. There were no command thrones, no weapons consoles, only a series of recessed terminals and a large, circular dais in the center, upon which a holographic map of the galaxy glowed with a soft blue light. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint, clean scent of filtered oxygen and the low hum of immense, contained power. It felt more like a temple than the heart of a starship. Ambassador Rostova stood waiting for them, her expression solemn. Beside her stood the ship's captain, a man whose face was a roadmap of age and expiry. NCE, his eyes holding a profound and weary calm. The progenitor, having transferred its consciousness into a smaller, mobile crystalline form for the journey, hovered silently, its ancient mind observing everything with an intensity that Kalen could feel as a subtle pressure in the air. Vorex was there too, his imposing form radiating hostility and suspicion, a warrior forced to walk in a house of peace. Progenitor, delegates, Rostova said with a respectful inclination of her head. Welcome to the Vigilance. We are honored by your presence. The honor is a necessity born of grave circumstances, Ambassador, the progenitor resonated. You have made a claim that strikes at the heart of cosmic stability. We have come for your proof. Rostova nodded, her calm unwavering. Of course, she turned to the captain. Captain, please show them. The captain gave a single, curt nod. He didn't speak, but moved to one of the terminals, his fingers dancing across the interface. The main holographic display shifted. The familiar star map of their galaxy compressed, pulling back until it was just a glowing spiral in a vast, dark expanse. This was the intergalactic void, the great empty between the islands of light. A red line extended from the edge of the galaxy, pointing out into that infinite blackness. For generations, our deep space sensor arrays have monitored the background radiation of the void, Rostova explained, her voice low and even. We have been searching for a specific anomaly, a signature our oldest records refer to only as the erasure. It is a subtle phenomenon, easily mistaken for sensor noise or a gravitational lensing effect. But it is not. It is a pattern. On the display, a section of the void at the end of the red line began to shimmer. The captain magnified the view. Kalen stared, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. It was not an object. It was not an energy field. It was an absence, a patch of darkness that was somehow darker than the void around it. Stars that should have been visible through it were simply not there, not blocked but gone, as if a hole had been cut in the fabric of reality itself. Our instruments can detect no radiation, no energy, no matter emanating from that region. The captain's voice was a low, gravelly baritone, the first time he had spoken. It is a zone of absolute null information, but it is not static, it is expanding, and it is moving. He initiated a temporal progression simulation. A faint, almost imperceptible ripple emanated from the edge of the dark patch, moving outward. It was slow, agonizingly slow, crawling across the void at a fraction of the speed of light. The simulation sped up, showing its projected path over thousands of years. The path was aimed directly at the outer rim of their galaxy, aimed directly at the Glycan hegemony. Vorex took an involuntary step back, a gesture of pure shock. "What is it?" he breathed, his aggression forgotten, replaced by a primal instinctual fear. "We do not know what it is," Rostova admitted. "Our ancestors encountered it once before. A scout fleet venturing into the void sent back one final, garbled transmission before they vanished. They described their ships, their own bodies, simply unwriting, ceasing to be. Not destroyed, but erased from existence atom by atom. The only thing that survived was a fragment of the pattern's signal, the signature of the void that consumed them. It is that signal we have been searching for. And now we have found it again." Kalen felt the full, crushing weight of understanding settle upon him. The vigilance, the names, the memory, it was all for this. The humans had not been preparing for a war against another species. They had been preparing for a war against non-existence. They had built their culture around the memory of this single, ultimate horror, a threat so profound that it had unified their entire, fractious species. "Your great severance," Rostova said, her gaze meeting Kalen's. "It was a response to a trauma. We now believe we know what that trauma was. Your ancestors must have encountered this same phenomenon. The cosmic night your sealed archives speak of. They survived, but the memory was so terrible, so fundamentally soul-shattering, that they chose to remove it from their minds entirely. They chose to forget the ultimate enemy. We chose to remember." The progenitor was perfectly still, the light within its crystalline form seeming to dim for a moment. "We were afraid," it resonated, and the admission was the most shocking thing Kalen had ever heard. The architects of the severance concluded that such a memory was too great a burden, that it would drive any logical species to madness. They believed peace could only be found by forgetting the existence of true chaos. "And they were wrong," Rostova said, her voice filled not with triumph but with a deep, sorrowful empathy. "Peace is not found by forgetting. It is found by preparing. We have spent 1,000 years preparing for this day. The vigilance is not a memorial to a past war. It is a promise to our future, a promise that we will stand against the silence, that we will not be erased." In that moment, standing on the bridge of the human ship, surrounded by the ghosts of their past and the specter of a shared, terrifying future, the divisions between Glycan and human dissolved. The arrogance of the hegemony, its millennia of rigid, ordered certainty, crumbled into dust. They were not the enlightened guardians of the galaxy. They were children who had closed their eyes and pretended the monster in the dark was not real. And the humans, the chaotic, emotional, scar-bearing humans, were the adults who had kept watch all night. The progenitor's light pulsed, bright and resolute. "You are right, Ambassador. We have been blind, but we will be blind no longer. The great severance is over. Today, the Glycan hegemony will begin to remember." A new silence fell upon the bridge, but this one was different. It was not the silence of fear or tension. It was the solemn, profound quiet of two civilizations, once strangers, now bound by a common, cosmic dread and a nascent, desperate hope. Kalen looked from the face of the human ambassador to the image of the encroaching void. The galaxy suddenly seemed much smaller, more fragile, a precious island of light in an infinite, hungry ocean. The fight for survival had not just begun. It had been raging in the memory of one species for 1,000 years, and now, at last, they were no longer alone. The broken silence was not an end, but a beginning. It was the sound of the universe waking up to its greatest, and perhaps its final, war.